Listen carefully, there's a moment of quiet, invisible moment where the avoidant sits alone, no distractions, no noise, no escape, and for the first time, they feel it. Not your words, not your texts, not your chasing. They feel your absence. And suddenly, something hits them harder than any argument ever could. How did they still love me after everything I did? Because you didn't just love them when it was easy. You loved them when they pulled away. You loved them when they went cold. You loved them when they acted like they didn't need you. And that kind of love, it doesn't make sense to someone who's spent their entire life running from connection. See, avoidants are not heartless. They are terrified. Terrified that if they let someone in, they'll lose control. Terrified that if they depend on you, they'll get hurt. So what do? They push you away before you can leave them. But here's the truth most people don't understand. Every time they distance themselves, every time they ignored you, every time they acted like you didn't matter, a part of them was watching you, testing you, wondering, will you leave like everyone else? And when you didn't,
when you stayed grounded, when you didn't beg,
when you loved without losing yourself, you broke their pattern. You became something they couldn't explain because they expected pressure. They expected drama. They expected you to collapse without them. But instead, you stood strong. You kept your dignity, and you still cared. That's what haunts them. Not your presence, but your strength combined with love. And now they're confused. Because for the first time, they're not running from someone weak. They're running from someone who saw them completely and didn't walk away. That creates a conflict inside them. Why do I miss someone I tried so hard to push away? Because deep down, they know you weren't chasing them. You were offering something real. And real love is rare for someone who's built their identity around emotional distance. So when they finally look back, when the silence gets loud, when the distractions stop working, they don't just miss you. They respect you. They feel you. And most of all, they can't believe you still love them through all of it. Avoidants don't reject love, they react to it. And that reaction is often misunderstood as indifference, coldness, or even arrogance. But what looks like a lack of care on the surface is usually something much deeper. A learned fear of emotional closeness that has been built over time, layer by layer. For them, love is not just connection, it's exposure. It means being seen, being known, and most importantly, being vulnerable. And vulnerability in their internal world is not safe. This didn't start with you. Long before you entered their life, they had already developed a pattern. Maybe they grew up in an environment where emotions weren't expressed openly. Maybe they learned that depending on someone leads to disappointment. Or maybe they experienced closeness that was inconsistent toward one moment and withdrawn the next. Over time, their mind created a simple rule. Don't rely on anyone too much. That rule became their protection. So when real love shows up, when someone is patient, present, and emotionally available, it doesn't feel comforting at first. It feels unfamiliar. And unfamiliar things, especially in emotional territory, can feel dangerous. Instead of leaning in, they instinctively lean back. Not because they don't value the connection, but because they don't fully trust it. Their system is wired to anticipate loss, not security. When you express care, consistency, or deeper feelings, it triggers something inside them. It's not the love itself that's the problem, it's what the love represents. It represents closeness, and closeness threatens their sense of independence. They start to feel like they're losing control, like they're being pulled into something they can't manage. That's when the distancing begins. They might take longer to respond, become less expressive, or create emotional space. To you, it feels like rejection. To them, it feels like self-preservation. What's important to understand is that they often don't consciously decide to push you away. It happens automatically. It's a reflex, not a strategy. Their mind is trying to protect them from a perceived emotional risk, even if that risk isn't actually present. And because they're not always aware of this internal process, they may struggle to explain their behavior. They might say they need space, or that things are moving too fast, without fully understanding why they feel that way. At the same time, there's a contradiction happening inside them. While one part of them is creating distance, another part is still connected to you. They may think about you, miss you, or even feel a sense of comfort knowing you're there. But instead of expressing those feelings openly, they keep them contained. Expressing. They would mean stepping into vulnerability, and that's exactly what they've trained themselves to avoid. This is why their actions can feel confusing. One moment they seem interested, even emotionally present, and the next moment they pull back without warning. It's not a game, and it's not about control. It's an internal push-pull dynamic between the desire for connection and the fear of losing themselves in it. Understanding this doesn't mean you should accept inconsistent behavior or lose yourself trying to prove your worth. It simply gives clarity. It shifts your perspective from they don't care to they don't know how to handle care. And that difference matters because it changes how you interpret their actions without forcing you to tolerate what doesn't align with your own emotional needs. Your consistent love does something powerful to an avoidant. It disrupts the pattern they've relied on for most of their life. They are used to a very specific emotional cycle. When they pull away, people usually react. They chase harder, become more emotional, demand answers, or try to force closeness. And when that happens, it confirms the avoidant's internal belief. Closeness leads to pressure, so they withdraw even more, reinforcing the cycle again and again. But when you respond differently, everything shifts. When you don't chase, when you don't panic, when you don't try to control their distance, it creates a break in that familiar loop. Suddenly, they're not getting the reaction they expected. Instead of pressure, they feel space. Instead of emotional intensity, they feel calm. And that's confusing for them at first because it doesn't match what their mind has been trained to anticipate. Your consistency becomes something they can't easily categorize. You're not abandoning them, but you're also not clinging to them. You're present, but you're not overwhelming. You care, but you're not trying to force them to respond in a certain way. That balance is rare in their experience, and it starts to challenge the narrative they've been living with. At first, they may test it. They might pull away a little more, just to see if you'll react like others did in the past. They're not doing this to manipulate you, they're trying to make sense of you. They want to know if your calmness is real or if it's just temporary. So they create distance and observe. They watch how you handle it. Do you lose your composure? Do you start chasing? Do you become someone else under pressure? And when you don't, when you remain grounded in yourself, it creates a new experience for them. They begin to realize that closeness doesn't always come with pressure, that someone can care about them without trying to control them. That emotional connection doesn't have to feel suffocating. This realization doesn't happen all at once. That builds slowly through repeated moments where your actions stay consistent, even when there's don't. Your steady presence becomes something they start to associate with safety, even if they don't fully understand it yet. It's not loud or dramatic. It's quiet, stable, and predictable. And for someone who is used to emotional unpredictability, that kind of stability can be both unfamiliar and deeply impactful. At the same time, your lack of reaction forces them to face something they usually avoid: their own behavior. When you don't engage in the usual push-pull dynamic, there's nothing to distract them from what they're doing. They can't blame your reactions or point to external drama. All that's left is their own distance, their own withdrawal, and the quiet awareness of what that might be costing them. That's where the shift begins. They start to feel the absence of what you bring, not because you made a scene, but because you didn't. Your calmness makes your presence more valuable, not less. It shows that your love isn't based on desperation, it's based on choice. And that's something they don't encounter often. Over time, this consistent, grounded energy begins to soften their defenses. Not in a dramatic way, but in small, almost unnoticeable moments. They may start to reach out a little more, open up slightly, or stay present just a bit longer than they usually would. It's subtle, but it's significant. Because what's happening beneath the surface is this: their old pattern is no longer working the way it used to. And in its place, a new possibility is forming, one where connection doesn't feel like something they have to escape from. Even when it feels like they've emotionally checked out, avoidants are far more observant than they appear. Their silence doesn't mean they're unaware, and their distance doesn't mean they've stopped paying attention. In reality, when they pull back, they often shift into a different mode, one where they watch instead of engage. It's quieter, less visible, but very active beneath the surface. They notice how you respond when they take longer to reply. They notice whether your tone changes, whether your energy becomes anxious, or whether you stay the same. They pick up on the subtle shifts: how you handle uncertainty, how you carry yourself when they're not giving you reassurance, how quickly you react to the space they create. These details matter to them more than direct conversations because observation feels safer than participation. For someone who struggles with vulnerability, watching from a distance creates a sense of control. They don't have to expose their own feelings, but they can still gather information about yours. And what they're really looking for isn't perfection, it's predictability. They want to understand whether your emotions are stable or reactive, whether your presence is steady or dependent on their behavior. This is why their behavior can feel so confusing. They may seem detached, but at the same time, they're quietly forming impressions about you. If your reactions become intense if you chase, demand, or show signs of emotional instability, it reinforces their internal belief that closeness leads to pressure. In their mind, it confirms that creating distance was the right decision. But when your response is different, when you remain composed, when you don't try to force them back, when your energy doesn't swing based on their actions, it stands out. It challenges what they expected to see. They start to recognize that your emotional state isn't dependent on their presence or absence. And that realization carries weight, even if they don't openly acknowledge it. They also pay attention to what you do with your life outside of them. Whether you continue focusing on your own growth, your work, your social connections, these things send a message. It tells them that your world doesn't revolve entirely around them. And while that might seem like it would push them further away, it actually does the opposite over time. It creates a sense of respect. Because in their experience, many people lose themselves trying to maintain closeness. When you don't do that, when you stay grounded in your own identity, it signals strength. It shows that your connection with them is something you value, but not something you depend on for your sense of self. That distinction is powerful, especially for someone who fears being overwhelmed or consumed in a relationship. At the same time, they're often trying to understand your intentions without asking directly. Open communication requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is exactly what they avoid. So instead of asking how you feel or what you want, they rely on observation. They look at patterns. They compare your words with your actions. They try to read between the lines. And when your behavior remains consistent over time, it starts to build a quiet form of trust. Not the kind that comes from deep conversations, but the kind that comes from repeated evidence. They see that you don't react impulsively. They see that you don't try to manipulate the situation. They see that your presence doesn't come with hidden pressure. That doesn't mean they immediately move closer. Change for them is slow and often internal before it becomes visible. But those observations begin to influence how they perceive you. You become someone they can't easily categorize based on their past experiences. Instead of seeing you as another person who will eventually demand more than they can give, they begin to see you as someone who operates differently. And that difference stays with them, even in moments when they choose distance. What truly leaves a lasting impact on an avoidant is not intensity, not emotional highs, and not how much you prove your love through words or sacrifice. It's something far more subtle, yet far more powerful, the combination of strength and love existing at the same time. Most people lean too far in one direction. They either become overly emotional, losing themselves in the connection, or they shut down completely to protect their pride. But when someone embodies both care and self-control, it creates an impression that doesn't fade easily. Avoidants are used to emotional extremes. They've seen what happens when someone gets too attached, how it leads to pressure, expectations, and a sense of being trapped. That's exactly what they fear. So when they sense that kind of energy, they instinctively pull back. Not because the person doesn't matter, but because the intensity feels overwhelming. It feels like something they won't be able to manage without losing their sense of independence. But when your love is steady instead of overwhelming, it changes how they experience connection. You're not trying to prove your worth by constantly reaching out. You're not seeking validation through their responses. You're not making them responsible for your emotional state. Instead, your care is calm, grounded, and consistent. It doesn't demand anything in return, and that's what makes it different. At the same time, your strength shows in how you handle their distance. You don't collapse when they pull away. You don't chase them for answers or try to force clarity out of confusion. You allow space without losing your self-respect. And that's where the shift happens. Because for someone who expects emotional reactions, your composure becomes something they can't ignore. They begin to see that your love isn't coming from a place of need. It's coming from a place of choice. You're choosing to care, but you're also choosing not to abandon yourself in the process. That balance is rare, and it challenges everything they've come to expect from relationships. This kind of energy creates a different emotional experience for them. Instead of feeling pressured, they feel observed but not judged. Instead of feeling controlled, they feel free but still connected. And that combination is unfamiliar in the best way. It allows them to stay present a little longer without triggering their usual need to escape. Your strength also removes the usual dynamics they rely on. There's no emotional chaos for them to react to, no drama to justify their distance, no overwhelming energy to push against. Without those triggers, they're left with something they're not used to, facing the reality of your presence without distortion. And that clarity can be uncomfortable at first, because it forces them to confront their own patterns without distraction. Over time, this leaves a deeper mark than any intense emotional display ever could. It's not loud or dramatic, but it's consistent. It builds quietly in their awareness. They start to associate you with stability, with emotional safety that doesn't come at the cost of their independence. And even if they don't immediately move closer, that impression stays with them. They may not say it out loud, but they recognize the difference. They recognize that you didn't try to control them, didn't try to rush them, didn't lose yourself trying to keep them.
And that recognition
Turns into something meaningful, something that lingers in their mind long after moments of distance. Because strength alone can feel distant, and love alone can feel overwhelming. But when both exist together, it creates a presence that feels balanced. And for someone who has spent so long avoiding imbalance, that kind of presence becomes something they don't forget. Your absence affects an avoidant in a way your presence often couldn't, and it's not because your presence lacked value, it's because your presence was something they learned how to manage. When you were there, consistently showing up, caring, and engaging, they had a sense of control over the connection. Even if they pulled away, they knew somewhere in the background that you were still within reach. That quiet certainty allowed them to keep their distance without fully confronting what your presence actually meant to them. But when that presence is no longer there in the same way, something shifts internally. The emotional safety net they didn't even realize they were relying on begins to disappear. And without that constant reassurance in the background, they can't avoid the silence anymore. That silence becomes loud, not because you created drama, but because you removed it. There's no distraction, no ongoing interaction to dilute their thoughts. Just space, and in that space, awareness begins to surface. Avoidants are skilled at suppressing emotions when they're actively engaged in a dynamic. When there's communication, even if it's inconsistent, it gives them something to focus on externally. But when that external connection fades, they're left with their internal world. And that's where things start to feel different. Thoughts they once ignored begin to return. Moments they brushed off suddenly replay. The way you handled them, the patience you showed, the way you didn't react the way others did it all becomes clearer in hindsight. Your absence removes the pressure they feared, but it also removes the comfort they didn't fully appreciate. And that combination creates a kind of emotional contrast they're not used to. When you were present, they focused on maintaining distance. When you're absent, they start to feel the distance itself. And that feeling isn't something they can easily push away because there's nothing replacing it. They may try to distract themselves at first. They might focus on work, other people, or anything that keeps them from sitting with that emptiness. But distractions don't always hold. There are quiet moments, unexpected ones, where your absence becomes noticeable again. A song, a memory, a situation that reminds them of you. And in those moments, the emotional impact isn't filtered through their usual defenses. What makes your absence so powerful is that it doesn't demand anything from them. It doesn't ask for a response, doesn't create pressure, doesn't challenge them directly. It simply exists. And because of that, it allows them to process things at their own pace without feeling cornered. That lack of pressure ironically makes it easier for them to feel what they've been avoiding. They begin to realize that what you offered wasn't something they easily find elsewhere. Not because you tried to prove it, but because it revealed itself over time. The consistency, the calmness, the way you didn't lose control, it all stands out more clearly when it's no longer present. And that realization doesn't come with urgency at first. It builds slowly in layers as they connect the dots between what they had and what they now experience without it. This doesn't mean they immediately act on those feelings. Avoidants often take time to process before they move toward anything emotionally significant.
but the impact is there.
Your absence creates a space where reflection can happen without resistance. And in that space, they begin to feel something they couldn't fully access before, not because you weren't enough, but because they weren't ready to see it while you were still there. Respect for an avoidant is not given easily, and it's rarely based on words alone. It's built through what they observe over time, how someone carries themselves, how they respond under pressure, and most importantly, whether they maintain their sense of self in the face of emotional uncertainty. When you love an avoidant without losing yourself, it creates a kind of impression that goes far deeper than attraction or temporary attachment. It becomes something they recognize as rare, even if they don't openly admit it. Many people, when faced with distance, start to shift their behavior. They become more accommodating, more available, more willing to compromise their own needs just to keep the connection alive. From the outside, it looks like effort, like dedication. But to an avoidant, it often feels like pressure in disguise. Not because they don't appreciate it, but because it signals something they fear: dependency. It makes them feel like they're becoming responsible for someone else's emotional state. And that's exactly what they try to avoid. When you don't fall into that pattern, when you continue to value yourself even while caring about them, it changes how they see you. You're not trying to earn their attention by overextending yourself. You're not abandoning your own priorities just to stay close to them. Instead, you remain grounded. You give what feels genuine, but you don't give at the cost of your own stability. That balance is what creates respect. They notice that you don't chase when they pull away. Not in a cold or detached way, but in a composed and self-assured way. You allow space without turning it into a personal crisis. That tells them something important. Your emotional state is not controlled by their behavior. And for someone who fears being the center of someone else's emotional dependency, that's a relief. At the same time, your consistency shows that your care isn't conditional. You're not warm one moment and distant the next based on how they act. You're steady. That steadiness creates a sense of reliability, which is something avoidants often struggle to trust. But because you don't use your emotions as a way to control the situation, it feels different. It feels more authentic, less threatening. Over time, they begin to recognize that your presence doesn't come with hidden expectations. You're not trying to pull them into something they're not ready for. You're simply showing up as yourself. And that kind of authenticity is difficult to ignore. It stands in contrast to experiences where connection felt like something that needed to be managed or escaped from. This is where respect starts to take shape not through grand gestures, but through repeated moments where you choose self-respect over emotional reaction. Every time you hold your boundaries without becoming defensive, every time you stay calm instead of chasing clarity, every time you continue living your life instead of waiting for their next move, it reinforces a perception in their mind. They begin to see you as someone who is emotionally stable, someone who doesn't lose direction when things become uncertain. And that perception matters because it changes how they relate to you internally. You're no longer just someone who cares about them, you are someone they look up to in a quiet, unspoken way. That respect also creates a different kind of emotional tension. Not the kind that pushes them away, but the kind that makes them think. They start to question their own behavior, not because you confronted them, but because your actions highlight the contrast. You're handling the situation with clarity and control, while they're still relying on distance to feel safe. And even if they don't immediately close that gap, the awareness remains. They know, on some level, that you didn't try to hold on to them by losing yourself. You didn't shrink, didn't chase, didn't compromise your identity just to maintain the connection. And that realization stays with them, shaping how they remember you and how they measure future connections against what they experience with you. In the end, what makes this entire experience so powerful is not what you said, not what you tried to prove, and not how hard you fought to keep the connection alive. It's how you showed up through it all. You didn't just love when it was easy, when they were present, or when everything felt aligned. You loved in moments of confusion, in silence, in distance. And that kind of love doesn't disappear in someone's memory. It stays. It lingers. Because it wasn't based on condescends, it was rooted in something deeper, something steady, something real. And for someone who has spent their life avoiding depth, that kind of presence becomes impossible to fully ignore. At the same time, you didn't abandon yourself to maintain that love. You didn't lose your identity trying to hold on to someone who was unsure. You didn't collapse under the weight of their inconsistency. Instead, you remained grounded. You stayed connected to your own life, your own growth, your own sense of direction. And that balance scaring without losing control is what truly separates your impact from anything they've experienced before. It shows that love doesn't have to come with desperation, and connection doesn't have to mean sacrifice of self. What they couldn't understand in the moment, they begin to process in your absence. Without the constant interaction, without the familiar dynamic to hide behind, they're left with something much more honest, the reality of how you made them feel and how you handled everything without creating chaos. The way you didn't react the way others did. The way you didn't try to force something that wasn't ready. These things start to make sense over time, not all at once, but gradually, as they reflect in their own quiet moments. And in those moments, something shifts inside them. It is no longer about running from pressure or maintaining distance. It becomes about recognizing value they didn't fully see when it was right in front of them. They begin to understand that what you offered wasn't common. It wasn't something they can easily replace. It was a rare combination of patience, strength, and emotional clarity. And even if they don't immediately act on that realization, it changes how they remember you and how they measure every connection that comes after. Because in the end, the truth is simple. People don't forget how you made them feel when you didn't lose yourself. They don't forget the person who stayed steady when everything else felt uncertain. They don't forget the one who loved without control, who gave without chasing, who walked away with dignity instead of desperation. And for an avoidant, that kind of experience doesn't just pass, it stays with them, quietly shaping their thoughts, their emotions, and the way they see love long after you're gone. Thank you for taking the time to be here and invest in understanding something this deep and meaningful. It truly matters because the more clarity you gain, the stronger and more grounded you become in your own journey. Remember, your value was never defined by how someone responded to you. It was always reflected in how you showed up, how you loved, and how you stayed true to yourself through it all. Take care of yourself, stay strong, and keep moving forward with confidence. Goodbye for now, and I'll see you in the next one.